Brought to you by
the photograph. For most, these seemingly innocuous mementos are just that, a keepsake of a memory. To others, they can be far more, a captured moment, frozen in time. Some even believe that a photograph taken can capture the soul of its subject. Today, we ponder on what happens if you capture something other than the subject you had intended. Hello friends, and welcome back to another short film review here on ETF. As someone who is a lover of the moving image, I have also always been captivated by photography. There's something about the art of perfectly freezing a single fragment of time that can be looked back on for years to come that has always been poetic to me. In today's story, college student Rachel O'Hara decides to take the winter break to head outside of town to relax and to work on her final art assignment. She then heads to a forest nearby her family cottage to capture a few photos for reference. After heading back to her residence and looking through her film, she realizes that she brought something haunting back with her. I always love a story that focuses on a filmmaker or photographer. I find them incredibly relatable protagonists that allow me to connect further with the story I'm being presented with. This film is presented in a 4:3 aspect ratio, which is rare for any film these days, but has started making a comeback recently. Right from the rip, we begin in a photographer's darkroom, bathing us in red, and showcasing that the film is going to have a high contrast color palette. The framing of each shot felt precisely chosen, as if the idea was to make each new shot feel like it could have been a photograph in and of itself. There were some technical issues I noticed early on, one being how when the protagonist walked, the camera trembled slightly, as if it were placed on an unsound floor. The high contrast color that I thought was coming also starts to disappear once our protagonist leaves her darkroom, opting for a more warm and flat look, drained of most of its color, almost uncolor corrected. The film emphasizes shadow and silhouette quite a bit throughout, positioning our protagonist in front of sunlit windows and framed within them like a portrait. They weren't shy about having a hooded figure standing in bright daylight outside the window. I guess you could miss him if you weren't really focusing on the movie. They do make the empty location relevant to the story by having our protagonist mention that she came here to work on her assignment. The film's soundtrack is prominent throughout the piece, building a bit of looming dread. The audio recording throughout this one isn't the best quality, likely due to the space that they were shooting in being very empty and echoey, and some of the audio levels don't quite feel matched up. The film utilizes this haunting song throughout that really adds to the impact of what the film is trying to achieve. I love the audio choice of having the song start to merge into old radio static as she encounters the hanging man in the woods. Something I thought was interesting was how this one showcases the process of developing photos, making slides, setting up a projector, and operating it without feeling too dull. I can't say that our protagonist's performance is exactly believable, especially as she begins to notice the figure in her photos. Once we got to this point, to me, the film began to take on a very Ethan Hawke in Sinister vibe. For some reason, she openly talks to herself, which is just silly. I mean, I know people who do that. I do it myself. But in the context of the film, it just feels weird. Our protagonist then goes through a shift from her photos to painting. Now, I myself dabble in many art forms, so I know that most artists do. However, I feel like they probably should have just kept the focus on just one of these for a short. Though I did think it was interesting to see her using a sketchbook as a palette for her paint. It's a clever idea that I'd never thought of before. The film lingers quite a while in this scene of her painting, for no real reason other than to fill time. The film suddenly starts to feature some very low-grade makeup effects, and the hanged man prop is very unconvincing in wide shots. We then shift into a really interesting, almost dreamlike visual style that honestly reminded me more of a Raimi picture than anything else, though this could have been due to the isolated setting and single protagonist. I found myself wishing that the filmmakers had went for a more slow and 70s style with this film, utilizing smooth dolly shots and even locked off camera angles, as opposed to the handheld techniques that they ultimately chose. There's definitely a somber theme of suicide being presented throughout this story, and it's one that I think resonates in the reality of artists. Our protagonist wears black throughout the film, similar to what you would see theater kids wearing, and this is mirrored in the hanged men that pursue her. To me, this read as the spirits of those tortured artists who took their own fates in their hands and are calling her to join them. Despite its technical flaws, I have to give Scene an A-. This one was a strong yet simple narrative that delivered quite sure-handedly on its themes and presentation. It managed to be both relatable and entertaining throughout, which is more than most of these little indie shorts can manage. I think I definitely recommend to the right audience. Alright friends, that's going to bring this one to an end. I hope you enjoyed today's short review. If you like the content that we're producing here at ETF, please consider subscribing, or better yet, check us out over on Patreon. There you can get yourself some fun rewards, including some exclusive content just for our loving supporters. Until next week, keep creepy, and thanks for watching.